The gunshot echoed across the plains like thunder, startling Madeline Norris from her fitful sleep. She bolted upright, clutching the ragged blanket to her chest as she strained to hear any movement below. The bell tower of St. Augustine's church had been her sanctuary for 3 days now, but her pursuers were relentless. Through the small opening that served as a window, Madeline could see the silhouette of Bonanza, Colorado, against the pink-orange sky of dawn in 1876. Madeline's breathing quickened as she heard the church's front door creak open. She retreated further into the shadows of the bell tower, pressing her back against the cold stone wall. The rough-hewn wooden stairs leading up to her hiding place groaned under the weight of someone climbing them. Her trembling fingers found the small knife hidden in the folds of her skirt, her only defense against whoever had found her. The footsteps grew closer, deliberate and unhurried. Madeline held her breath. A tall figure appeared at the entrance to the bell tower, backlit by the early morning light. She could make out the outline of a cowboy hat and the glint of a revolver at his hip. "I know you're in here," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you." Madeline remained silent, gripping the knife tighter. "I believe God brought me here to find you," he continued, taking a careful step forward. "I heard the bell ring last night just once. Most folks didn't notice, but I did. I know the pastor's out of town, so I figured someone else was up here." As he moved into a patch of light, Madeline could see his face clearly for the first time. Dust-covered boots, worn denim pants, a blue shirt with a leather vest, and honest eyes that held no malice. This wasn't one of Whitaker's men. "My name is Matthew Calloway," he said, holstering his weapon to show he meant no harm. "And I think you might need some help." Madeline hesitated, weighing her options. After 3 days without proper food, her strength was waning. If this man wanted to hurt her, he could have done so already. "How do I know I can trust you?" she finally whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Matthew removed his hat and held it against his chest. "You don't, but I give you my word as a God-fearing man that I intend you no harm." He gestured to the east. "Those men who rode into town yesterday, they're looking for someone. I'm guessing that someone is you." Madeline's silence confirmed his suspicion. "I have a small ranch outside of town," Matthew continued. "It's not much, but it's safe. You can stay there until they move on." "Why would you help a stranger?" Madeline asked, still suspicious. Matthew's expression turned solemn. "Because 5 years ago, nobody helped my sister when she needed it. I won't make that mistake again." He extended his hand. "Will you come with me? We need to leave before the town wakes up." Madeline looked at his outstretched hand, then back to his face. Something in his eyes spoke of sincerity, a rare commodity in her experience. With a deep breath, she stepped forward and placed her hand in his. "I'm Madeline," she said simply. "Madeline Norris." Matthew nodded, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Norris. Now let's get you somewhere safe." The descent from the bell tower was tense, each creak of the wooden steps making Madeline wince. Matthew led the way, pausing occasionally to listen for any movement in the church below. When they reached the ground floor, he motioned for her to wait while he checked outside. "Coast is clear," he whispered upon returning. "My horse is tied around back. Stay close." They slipped out through a side door, the cool morning air a welcome relief after the stuffiness of the bell tower. Matthew's horse, a sturdy Appaloosa, nickered softly as they approached. "Can you ride?" Matthew asked, preparing the saddle. Madeline nodded. "I grew up on a farm in Kansas." "Good, you'll ride in front. I'll keep you steady." With practiced ease, Matthew helped Madeline onto the horse before mounting behind her. The intimacy of the position made her tense, but the urgency of their situation overrode her discomfort. Matthew kept a respectful distance, holding the reins on either side of her without touching her directly. "Hold on," he instructed as he urged the horse into a trot. They traveled through the back streets of Bonanza, avoiding the main road where early risers might spot them. The town was still mostly asleep, with only a few lanterns burning in windows where ranchers and miners prepared for their day. As they passed the saloon, Madeline instinctively ducked her head. Matthew noticed but said nothing, focusing instead on guiding them out of town as quickly as possible. Once they cleared the last buildings, he spurred the horse into a gallop, heading west toward the mountains. The sun was fully risen by the time Matthew slowed the horse to a walk. They had been traveling for over an hour, following a narrow trail that wound through pine forests and open meadows. In the distance, Madeline could see a modest cabin nestled against a backdrop of rocky hills. "That's home," Matthew said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's not much, but it's mine." As they drew closer, Madeline could see a small barn, a corral with 3 horses, and a vegetable garden next to the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating someone was already there. "My ranch hand, Charlie," Matthew explained, noticing her renewed tension. "He's trustworthy. Former Buffalo soldier who saved my life during a cattle drive gone wrong 3 years back. Been with me ever since." They dismounted in front of the cabin, Madeline's legs wobbly after the long ride. Matthew steadied her with a light touch on her elbow before calling out, "Charlie, got company." The cabin door opened and a tall black man with graying temples stepped out, wiping his hands on a dishcloth. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Madeline, but he quickly composed his features. "Miss," he acknowledged with a polite nod. "Coffee's hot." "Thank you," Madeline replied, grateful for his lack of questions. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living space. A door at the back presumably led to sleeping quarters. Charlie poured 3 cups of coffee while Matthew pulled out a chair for Madeline at the rough-hewn table. "You look like you haven't eaten in days," Charlie observed, placing a plate of cornbread and bacon in front of her. Madeline wanted to be polite, to eat slowly, but hunger won out. She devoured the food while Matthew and Charlie exchanged meaningful glances over her head. "Miss Norris," Matthew began once she'd slowed down, "I don't mean to pry, but those men in town, they seemed dangerous. If we're going to help you, we need to know what we're up against." Madeline set down her fork, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. These men had shown her kindness, but she had learned the hard way that kindness often came with conditions. "They work for a man named Whitaker," she finally said. "Thomas Whitaker." Charlie let out a low whistle. "The mining baron from Denver, that's bad business." Matthew leaned forward, his expression serious. "What does Whitaker want with you?" Madeline met his gaze. "My father was a geologist. Before he died, he discovered a significant gold deposit in the hills south of here. He documented everything in his journals, including maps showing exactly where to dig." She took a deep breath. "Whitaker wants those journals. He's willing to kill for them." "And where are these journals now?" Matthew asked. "Hidden not on me," she added quickly, "but somewhere safe." Matthew nodded slowly, processing this information. "Whitaker's not known for giving up easily. His men will keep searching." "I know," Madeline whispered. "That's why I need to keep moving. I've already put you at risk by coming here." "Nonsense," Charlie interjected. "You ain't going nowhere till you've had proper rest." Matthew agreed. "We have a spare room. It's small, but it's private. You can stay as long as you need to." Madeline wanted to protest, but exhaustion was overtaking her. "Just for today," she conceded. "I'll leave tomorrow." "We'll talk about that after you've slept," Matthew said gently. "Charlie, would you mind checking on the horses while I show Miss Norris to her room?" The bedroom was indeed small, containing only a narrow bed, a chest for clothing, and a washstand with a basin and pitcher of water. But to Madeline, who had spent 3 nights sleeping on the hard wooden floor of a bell tower, it looked like luxury. "Get some rest," Matthew said from the doorway. "You're safe here." For the first time in days, Madeline believed it might be true. As the door closed behind Matthew, she sank onto the bed, tears of relief and exhaustion flowing freely. Within minutes, she was asleep. While Madeline slept, Matthew and Charlie discussed their precarious situation. "Whitaker's got men all over the territory," Charlie said grimly. "Won't be long before they start checking outlying ranches." Matthew paced the small confines of the cabin. "We need more information. I'm going back to town to see what I can find out. You stay here with Miss Norris." Charlie nodded, checking his shotgun. "Be careful, Matt. Whitaker's men don't ask questions before shooting." Matthew saddled a different horse for his return to Bonanza, not wanting to be recognized by the same mount he'd ridden earlier. The town was now fully awake, with miners heading to work and merchants opening their stores. He tied his horse outside the general store and entered, nodding to Mrs. Patterson behind the counter. "Morning, Matthew," she greeted him. Bit early for your monthly supplies, isn't it? Just need some coffee, madam, he replied, scanning the store casually. Two strangers stood near the back, examining rifles. Their city clothes and clean boots marked them as outsiders. Matthew selected a bag of coffee beans and approached the counter. Seems like we have some visitors in town, he commented quietly. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. Been here since yesterday, asking questions about a young woman, offering money for information. She lowered her voice further. Sheriff staying clear of them, which tells me all I need to know. Matthew paid for his purchase. Appreciate the warning, madam. As he left the store, he noticed more men he didn't recognize, 3 at the saloon and 2 more outside the hotel. Whitaker was casting a wide net. Matthew decided to risk visiting the telegraph office to send a message to an old friend in Denver who might have information about Whitaker. The telegraph operator, a young man named Jenkins, looked nervous as Matthew entered. Everything all right, Jenkins? Matthew asked, noticing the sheen of sweat on the young man's brow. Fine, Mr. Calloway, Jenkins replied too quickly. Just busy with messages. What can I do for you? Matthew scribbled out a telegram and paid for it, adding a generous tip. Might be some men coming in asking about telegrams. I'd appreciate it if this one slipped your mind. Jenkins pocketed the extra coins with a nod of understanding. As Matthew left the telegraph office, he spotted 2 of Whitaker's men walking purposefully in his direction. He ducked into the alley beside the building, moving swiftly toward the back where he could circle around to his horse. But as he rounded the corner, he came face to face with a third man, this one with a star pinned to his vest. Matthew Calloway, Sheriff Davis said with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just the man I wanted to see. Sheriff, Matthew acknowledged cautiously. Something I can help you with? Some gentlemen in town are looking for a missing woman. Thought you might know something about that, seeing as how you were at the church mighty early this morning. Matthew kept his expression neutral. Must have been someone else. I've been at my ranch since yesterday. The sheriff's smile disappeared. Don't play games, Calloway. Whitaker's offering $500 for information about the girl. That's a lot of money for a struggling rancher like yourself. Must be an important girl, Matthew replied evenly. Important enough that helping her could get you killed. The sheriff stepped closer. Where is she? I don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff, but if I were you, I'd be careful about whose side I'm on. Badges can be taken away. Sheriff Davis's face hardened. Is that a threat, Calloway? Just an observation. Matthew started to move past him. Now, if there's nothing else, I've got a ranch to run. The sheriff grabbed his arm. This isn't over. Matthew looked pointedly at the hand on his arm until Sheriff Davis released him. Never thought it was, he said before walking away, every muscle tense as he waited for the sound of a gun being drawn. But the sheriff let him go, and Matthew made it back to his horse without further incident. As he rode out of town, he was certain of 2 things. They had very little time before Whitaker's men found them, and Sheriff Davis couldn't be trusted. When Matthew returned to the ranch, he found Charlie on the porch, rifle across his lap. Everything quiet here? Matthew asked, dismounting. Charlie nodded. She's still sleeping. What did you find out? Matthew relayed what he had learned in town, including his confrontation with the sheriff. Davis has always been for sale to the highest bidder, Charlie commented bitterly. So what's the plan? Before Matthew could answer, the door opened and Madeline appeared, her hair damp and face freshly washed. She had found a clean shirt, presumably one of Matthew's, which hung loosely over her own skirt. I hope you don't mind, she said, gesturing to the shirt. Mine was in need of washing. Not at all, Matthew replied, momentarily distracted by how the morning light caught in her auburn hair. He cleared his throat. How are you feeling? Better, thank you. She stepped onto the porch. I heard voices. Is something wrong? Matthew and Charlie exchanged glances before Matthew answered. Whitaker's men are all over Bonanza. The sheriff's working with them. It won't be long before they start searching the outlying properties. Madeline's face paled. Then I need to leave. I won't put you in more danger than I already have. And go where? Charlie asked practically. They've got men watching every road out of the county by now. Charlie's right, Matthew added. Running isn't the answer. We need to deal with Whitaker directly. Madeline shook her head vehemently. No, you don't understand what he's capable of. My father trusted him and it got him killed. The pain in her voice silenced both men. After a moment, Matthew spoke gently. Tell us what happened, Madeline, all of it. Madeline sank into a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My father, William Norris, was hired by Whitaker Mining Company last year to survey potential sites in Colorado. He was excited about the opportunity, said it would give us a fresh start after my mother died. She took a deep breath before continuing. He discovered a significant vein of gold in the mountains south of Bonanza. Instead of reporting it immediately, he decided to verify his findings and document everything thoroughly. That's when he began to notice discrepancies in Whitaker's operations. What kind of discrepancies? Charlie asked. Claim jumping, forged deeds, strong-arming legitimate miners off their land. Madeline's voice hardened. My father was an honest man. He confronted Whitaker with what he had found. The next day he was dead supposedly in a mining accident. But you don't believe it was an accident, Matthew said softly. Madeline looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I know it wasn't. The night before he died, he gave me his journals for safekeeping, said if anything happened to him, I should take them to the federal marshal in Denver. The very next morning, Whitaker's men came to our lodgings demanding the journals. When I refused to give them up, they tried to take them by force. How did you get away? Charlie inquired. Our landlady helped me. She created a diversion while I slipped out the back. I've been running ever since, trying to reach Denver, but Whitaker's men have been one step ahead of me at every turn. Matthew's jaw tightened as he processed her story. So the journals contain evidence of Whitaker's crimes as well as the location of the gold deposit. Madeline nodded. Enough evidence to ruin him if it reaches the right hands. That's why he's so desperate to find me. And where are these journals now? Matthew asked. Madeline hesitated, still not fully trusting them with this vital information. You don't have to tell us, Matthew assured her. But we need a plan, and knowing where they are might help. After a moment's consideration, Madeline decided to trust them. They're still in Bonanza, hidden in the church beneath the floorboards of the confessional. I was planning to retrieve them once Whitaker's men moved on, but they aren't moving on, Charlie finished for her. Matthew stood up, determination in his stance. We need those journals. They're our only leverage against Whitaker. It's too dangerous, Madeline protested. The church is probably being watched. Not at night, Matthew countered. And not if they think you've already fled town. Charlie and I can create a diversion, make it look like you've been spotted heading east. While Whitaker's men chase that lead, I'll retrieve the journals. Charlie nodded in agreement. It could work. I still have friends among the railroad workers. They could spread the word about seeing a woman matching Madeline's description boarding an eastbound train in Pueblo. Madeline looked between the two men, overwhelmed by their willingness to help her. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Matthew met her gaze steadily. I told you God brought me to that bell tower for a reason. I believe that reason was to help you see justice done. There was something in his eyes, a blend of determination, compassion, and something else she couldn't quite name that made Madeline believe him. For the first time since her father's death, she felt hope. Thank you, she whispered. Both of you. The rest of the day was spent preparing for their plan. Charlie rode out to speak with his contacts at the railroad, while Matthew taught Madeline how to use a revolver. I pray you won't need this, he said as he placed the weapon in her hands. But if you do, I want you to be ready. Madeline felt the weight of the gun, remembering how her father had taught her to shoot a rifle for hunting. This was different. This was about potentially taking a human life. The thought made her stomach turn, but she set her jaw and focused on Matthew's instructions. As the sun began to set, Charlie returned with news. Word spreading about a woman matching Madeline's description seen boarding a train to Pueblo. By morning, Whitaker's men should be heading that way. Good work, Matthew said, checking his own revolver before tucking it into his holster. I'll head to the church after midnight. Charlie, you stay here with Madeline if I'm not back by dawn. We'll come looking for you, Madeline said firmly, not allowing him to finish that thought. Matthew smiled at her determination. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. As darkness fell, tension filled the small cabin. Matthew prepared to leave, strapping on his gun belt and pulling on a dark coat that would help him blend into the night. Before he left, Madeline approached him, concern evident in her features. "Be careful," she said softly. "These men won't hesitate to kill you." Matthew gently took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I'll be back before you know it. Just keep that gun close and trust Charlie. He's the best man I know in a fight." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, an unspoken connection forming between them. Then Matthew released her hand, nodded to Charlie, and disappeared into the night. The ride to Bonanza was tense, Matthew staying off the main roads and keeping to the shadows. The town was mostly quiet when he arrived, though the saloon was still lit up and raucous with late-night revelers. He left his horse in a stand of trees behind the church and approached on foot, carefully scanning for any sign of Whitaker's men. The church was dark and appeared unguarded. Matthew slipped through the side door he and Madeline had used that morning, which he had intentionally left unlocked. Inside, the church was silent and shadowy, moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows and casting colorful patterns on the floor. Matthew made his way to the confessional, counting the pews as Madeline had instructed. The small booth was cramped, but he managed to pry up the loose floorboard she had described. In the space beneath, wrapped in oilcloth, were 3 leather-bound journals. He had just secured them inside his coat when he heard the church's front door open. Quickly replacing the floorboard, Matthew pressed himself into the corner of the confessional, drawing his revolver. Footsteps echoed in the church, accompanied by the sound of multiple men speaking in hushed tones. "Check everywhere," a gruff voice ordered. "Whitaker says she might come back for something hidden here." Matthew held his breath as the footsteps drew nearer to the confessional. He had 2 options: try to shoot his way out, likely ending in his death, or find another way. His eyes darted around the small space, landing on a small vent near the ceiling that connected to the church's attic. Moving silently, Matthew holstered his gun and pulled himself up, using the walls of the confessional for leverage. The vent cover came away easily, and he hoisted himself into the narrow opening just as the confessional door was yanked open. "Nothing here," a voice called out, and Matthew froze in his precarious position, halfway into the attic space. "Check under the floorboards," the gruff voice commanded. Matthew held perfectly still as he heard the sound of the floorboard being pried up, followed by a curse. "Nothing. She must have taken whatever was here when she left. Keep searching. She could still be in town." The men moved on, and Matthew pulled himself fully into the attic. He crawled through the dusty space until he reached a small window that overlooked the back of the church. The drop to the ground was about 15 feet, risky, but doable. Matthew waited until he heard the men moving to the front of the church before pushing open the window and lowering himself out, hanging by his fingertips before dropping to the ground. The impact sent a jolt of pain up his legs, but nothing seemed broken. He crouched in the shadows, watching as lanterns bobbed inside the church. Once certain he wasn't being pursued, Matthew made his way back to his horse and mounted up, keeping to back alleys and dark streets until he was clear of Bonanza. Only then did he urge his horse into a gallop, the precious journals secure against his chest. Back at the cabin, Madeline paced anxiously while Charlie kept watch by the window. Every sound from outside made her jump, imagining Matthew captured or worse. "He knows what he's doing," Charlie assured her. "Matthew's smarter than most give him credit for." "How long have you known him?" Madeline asked, seeking distraction from her worry. Charlie settled back in his chair. "Going on 3 years now. I was drifting after the army, taking odd jobs on ranches. Got into some trouble in a town south of here. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong skin color." His expression darkened at the memory. "Mob was ready to string me up when Matthew rode in. He didn't know me from Adam, but he stood up to them, 6-gun drawn, and said they'd have to go through him first." Madeline sat down across from him, drawn into the story. "What happened?" He talked them down, got the sheriff involved, made them see reason. Turned out the real culprit was the mayor's son, who confessed once Matthew started asking questions no one else had bothered with. Charlie shook his head, still amazed by the memory. "Matthew offered me a job after that, said he needed someone who could handle themselves in a tight spot." "He seems like a good man," Madeline said softly. Charlie studied her for a moment. One of the best I know, lost his sister to a violent husband some years back, changed him, made him determined to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves, especially women." He paused. "He sees something in you, Miss Norris, something worth fighting for." Madeline felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Charlie replied with a knowing smile. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Charlie immediately positioned himself by the door, shotgun ready, while Madeline took cover behind him, the revolver Matthew had given her held firmly in both hands. "Charlie, Madeline," Matthew's familiar voice called out, and both lowered their weapons in relief. Matthew entered, looking dusty and tired but unharmed. His eyes found Madeline's immediately, a smile breaking across his face. "I got them," he said, pulling the journals from inside his coat. Madeline rushed forward, taking the precious books with trembling hands. "You did it," she whispered, looking up at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. "We're not safe yet," Matthew cautioned, though he couldn't help returning her smile. "Whitaker's men were at the church. They know something was hidden there. But they don't know what," Charlie pointed out. "And by morning they'll be chasing ghosts in Pueblo," Matthew agreed. "It buys us some time, but not much. We need to get these journals to the federal marshal in Denver as soon as possible." "I'll go," Madeline said firmly. "This is my fight." "Our fight now," Matthew corrected gently. "And you won't be going alone. I'm coming with you." Charlie cleared his throat. "Someone needs to stay and watch the ranch. I'll keep things running here while you two head to Denver." The decision made, they spent the next hour planning their journey. They would leave before dawn, taking a less traveled route to avoid Whitaker's men. If all went well, they could reach Denver in 3 days. As Madeline prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about Matthew, his courage, his kindness, the way his eyes seemed to see right through her defenses. It was dangerous to feel this way, especially now, but she couldn't deny the connection forming between them. In his own room, Matthew was having similar thoughts. He had felt drawn to Madeline from the moment he saw her in the bell tower, and that attraction had only grown as he came to know her strength and determination. But he reminded himself that her safety had to come first. Whatever was developing between them would have to wait until Whitaker was no longer a threat. Dawn was just breaking when they set out, the eastern sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Madeline rode the mare Charlie had saddled for her, while Matthew led the way on his Appaloosa. The journals were securely packed in Matthew's saddlebags, along with provisions for the journey. "Remember," Charlie said as they departed, "stick to the plan. If you're not in Denver by the 3rd day, I'm coming after you." Matthew clasped his friend's hand. "Take care of yourself, Charlie. Don't take any unnecessary risks." "Same to you," Charlie replied, his gaze moving between Matthew and Madeline meaningfully. They rode at a steady pace through the morning, keeping to less traveled trails that wound through the foothills. Matthew was familiar with the terrain, having made the journey to Denver many times to sell cattle. Madeline proved to be an excellent rider, keeping up without complaint despite the rough conditions. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Sitting beside a small stream, Madeline found herself studying Matthew's profile as he kept watch over the surrounding area. "Tell me about your sister," she said suddenly, remembering what Charlie had shared. Matthew turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "Charlie told you about Rebecca," Madeline nodded. "A little, I hope you don't mind." Matthew was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "She was younger than me by 4 years, bright, beautiful, stubborn as the day is long." A sad smile crossed his face. "She married too young to a man none of us knew well, Nathan Cooper. He seemed decent enough at first, but once they were married, he trailed off, the pain still evident after all these years." "He hurt her," Madeline supplied softly. Matthew nodded. "I didn't know how bad it was until it was too late. She wrote to me asking for help, but by the time I got there..." His hands clenched into fists. "Cooper had beaten her so badly she died 2 days later. He was gone by then, ran off to escape the law. I tracked him for months but never found him." "I'm sorry," Madeline said, reaching out to touch his hand gently. Matthew looked down at her hand on his, then back to her face. "After that, I made a promise to God. If I ever had the chance to help someone in danger, I wouldn't hesitate. When I heard that bell ring in the middle of the night, something told me to check the church, finding you there." He shook his head, still somewhat amazed. It felt like divine intervention. "Perhaps it was," Madeline said softly. Their eyes held for a long moment, the connection between them deepening. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they leaned toward each other. A distant gunshot shattered the moment. Both jerked back, instantly alert. "Hunters, maybe," Madeline suggested hopefully. Matthew shook his head, already moving to gather their belongings. "We can't risk it. Mount up." They continued their journey with renewed urgency, pushing the horses harder as they navigated the increasingly rugged terrain. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," Matthew shouted over the strengthening wind. "We can shelter there for the night." The rain was falling in earnest by the time they reached the abandoned shack. It was small and rustic, but its roof was mostly intact, and the stone fireplace appeared functional. Matthew quickly settled the horses in a lean-to attached to the back while Madeline gathered wood for a fire. Inside, the shack was dusty but dry. A single room with a rough wooden table, a bench, and the remains of a straw mattress in the corner. Madeline got a fire going in the fireplace while Matthew brought in their saddlebags and secured the door against the worsening storm. "It's not much," he apologized, setting their meager supplies on the table, "but it'll keep us dry for the night." Madeline smiled, the firelight casting a warm glow across her features. "It's perfect." They prepared a simple meal of beans and coffee, the hot food reviving their spirits after the long day's ride. As they ate, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the small windows and wind howling through the cracks in the walls. "Do you think Whitaker's men are still following us?" Madeline asked, wrapping her hands around her tin cup for warmth. Matthew considered the question. "Hard to say. The rain will wash away our tracks, which works in our favor, but Whitaker isn't the type to give up easily." "No, he isn't," Madeline agreed solemnly. She set her cup down and moved to retrieve her father's journals from Matthew's saddlebag. "I want to show you something." She returned to the fire and opened one of the journals, carefully turning the pages until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, pointing to a detailed map. "This is where my father found the gold deposit. But more importantly, these pages document how Whitaker has been systematically forcing legitimate claim holders off their land." Matthew leaned closer to examine the meticulous notes and diagrams. "Your father was very thorough. He believed in doing things properly, he thought." Madeline's voice caught. "He thought Whitaker would want to do things legally. That's why he confronted him directly instead of going straight to the authorities. He didn't realize what kind of man he was dealing with." Matthew gently covered her hand with his own. "Your father sounds like an honorable man. We'll make sure his work wasn't in vain." Madeline looked up, their faces inches apart in the firelight. "Thank you, Matthew, for everything." Time seemed to slow as they gazed at each other. The storm raged outside, but in that moment, there was only the crackling fire, the warmth of their joined hands, and the undeniable pull between them. Matthew raised his free hand to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "Madeline," he murmured, her name almost a prayer on his lips. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as his hand cupped her cheek. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Matthew leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. The tenderness of it took Madeline's breath away. She had been kissed before, but never like this, never with such care and reverence. When they finally parted, both were breathless, eyes wide with the realization of what had just happened. "I shouldn't have," Matthew began, but Madeline silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "Yes, you should have," she whispered, "and I'm glad you did." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility, but Matthew, ever mindful of her situation, took her hand and kissed it gently before releasing it. "We should get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Though part of her wished the moment could have continued, Madeline appreciated his restraint. They were still in danger, still being hunted. Whatever was growing between them would have to wait. Matthew gave her the straw mattress, insisting he would be comfortable enough on the floor near the fire. As Madeline lay down, pulling her coat tightly around her for warmth, she watched him through half-closed eyes. In the firelight, his profile was strong and steady, a reminder of the safety he represented in her tumultuous world. Despite the storm raging outside and the uncertain future ahead, Madeline fell asleep with a sense of peace she hadn't felt since before her father's death. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. They set out early, making good time along trails that wound ever closer to Denver. By midday, they had reached a high ridge that offered a panoramic view of the plains stretching out below them. "We'll be in Denver by this time tomorrow," Matthew said as they paused to rest the horses. "Once we reach the city, we'll go straight to the federal marshal's office." Madeline nodded, but her expression was troubled. "And then what? Whitaker is powerful with connections throughout Colorado." "Even with my father's evidence, will it be enough?" "The federal marshal's answer to Washington, not to local interests," Matthew assured her. "And your father's journals provide a solid case against Whitaker. The law will have to act." Madeline wanted to believe him, but years of watching her father struggle against corrupt officials had left her skeptical. "I hope you're right." They continued their journey, making camp that night in a protected hollow. The ease between them had grown, though both were careful to maintain a respectful distance after the previous night's kiss. There would be time for exploring those feelings once they reached Denver and Madeline was safe. As they prepared to set out on the final leg of their journey the next morning, Matthew noticed a plume of dust on the trail behind them. He quickly doused their campfire and urged Madeline to mount up. "Riders coming," he explained tersely. "Could be nothing, but we can't take chances." They set off at a brisk pace, sticking to the original route but pushing their horses harder. When Matthew glanced back a half-hour later, the dust cloud had grown closer. "They're gaining on us," he said grimly. "We need to find cover." The terrain ahead offered few options, mostly open plains with scattered stands of trees. But to their right, a steep ravine cut through the landscape, its depths lined with dense brush and rocky outcroppings. "This way," Matthew directed, turning his horse toward the ravine. "We can use the ravine for cover and still make progress toward Denver." The descent into the ravine was treacherous, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses carefully down the rocky slope. Once at the bottom, the going was easier, with a narrow game trail winding alongside a small stream. "We should be able to follow this for several miles," Matthew said, helping Madeline remount. "With luck, our pursuers will continue on the main trail," but luck was not on their side. They had traveled less than a mile when the sound of hoofbeats and sliding rocks announced that their pursuers had found their trail. "Ride ahead," Matthew ordered, passing the saddlebags containing the journals to Madeline. "Follow the stream. It will lead you out of the ravine about 5 miles ahead. From there, Denver is due east. Don't stop for anything." "I'm not leaving you," Madeline protested. "You have to," Matthew insisted. "The journals are what matter. Get them to the marshal." He drew his revolver. "I'll catch up." Madeline hesitated, torn between the mission and the man who had risked everything for her. "Matthew, go," he urged as the sounds of their pursuers grew louder. Now, with a last anguished look, Madeline spurred her horse forward, clutching the precious saddlebags. Matthew watched her go, then positioned himself behind a large boulder, gun ready. The first of Whitaker's men rounded the bend in the ravine moments later. Matthew recognized the lead rider as one of the men he had seen in the general store in Bonanza. There were 3 of them, all armed, all focused on the trail ahead. Matthew waited until they were almost past his position before calling out, "That's far enough, gentlemen." The riders reined in sharply, hands moving to their weapons. Matthew fired a warning shot into the air. "Next one won't miss. Turn around and ride out the way you came in." The leader, a hard-faced man with a scar across his cheek, laughed. "1 man against 3, those are poor odds, friend." "Not if that one man has the drop on you," Matthew replied evenly. "Now turn around." "The woman isn't worth dying for." The scarred man's expression darkened. "Whitaker's offering $1,000 for her and those books she stole. That's worth a little risk." "She didn't steal anything," Matthew said, his anger rising. "Whitaker murdered her father for discovering his crimes." The journals prove it. Don't much care about the details, the scarred man replied. Just the money. With a subtle nod to his companions, he added, and you're in our way. Matthew sensed the movement behind him a split second too late. A fourth rider, who must have circled around while the others kept him talking, brought the butt of his gun down on Matthew's head. Pain exploded in his skull, and darkness claimed him. Madeline rode hard along the stream, fighting the urge to look back. The ravine twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing until the brush scraped her legs, other times widening into small clearings. All the while, the sound of running water guided her forward. When the gunshot echoed through the ravine, Madeline pulled her horse to a halt, turning back toward the sound. Had Matthew fired that shot, or had Whitaker's men caught up to him? The thought of Matthew facing those men alone filled her with dread. She hesitated, torn between continuing to Denver as he had instructed and going back to help him. The journals were important. They represented justice for her father and for all the others Whitaker had wronged. But Matthew had become important to her too, in ways she hadn't expected. "What should I do?" she whispered to herself, clutching the saddlebags tightly. Another shot rang out, followed by shouting that was too distant to make out clearly. That decided her. She couldn't leave Matthew to face Whitaker's men alone. Turning her horse around, Madeline headed back up the ravine, drawing the revolver Matthew had given her. She approached cautiously, keeping to the cover of the brush along the stream. As she rounded a bend, she saw them 3 men standing over a prone figure on the ground. Matthew. A fourth man was securing something to his saddle. The journals. Rage and fear surged through Madeline in equal measure. She needed a plan. 4 armed men against 1 woman with limited shooting experience were impossible odds, but she couldn't just watch them take Matthew and the journals. As she considered her options, one of the men bent down to check on Matthew. "He's coming around. Better tie him up before he gives us more trouble." "What about the woman?" another asked. "Whitaker wants her too." The scarred man, who seemed to be in charge, spat on the ground. "She can't have gotten far. Once we secure him, we'll track her down." Madeline's mind raced. She needed a diversion, something to even the odds. Her gaze fell on the horses, tethered loosely to a nearby tree, if she could startle them. Carefully aiming the revolver, Madeline fired a shot just above the horses' heads. The effect was immediate. The animals reared and bucked in panic, breaking their tethers and scattering in all directions. The men shouted in alarm, momentarily distracted as they tried to catch their mounts. Madeline used the confusion to her advantage, riding hard into the clearing with her gun raised. "Step away from him," she shouted, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. The men spun toward her, reaching for their weapons, but she fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt at the scarred man's feet. "The next one goes through you. Now back away." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the scarred man slowly raised his hands. "Easy now, miss. No need for anyone to get hurt." "The journals," Madeline demanded, gesturing to the fourth man who was still holding the saddlebags. "Toss them over there by the stream." The man hesitated, looking to his leader for guidance. The scarred man gave a slight nod, and the saddlebags were thrown toward the stream. "Now all of you over there," Madeline directed, pointing to a spot well away from both Matthew and the journals. "Hands where I can see them." As the men complied, Madeline dismounted, keeping her gun trained on them while she moved to check on Matthew. He was conscious but groggy, blood trickling from a wound on his temple. "Matthew," she whispered urgently. "Can you stand?" Matthew groaned, struggling to focus on her face. "Madeline. You should be heading to Denver." "I couldn't leave you," she replied, helping him to his feet. "Can you ride?" He nodded, wincing at the movement. "Get the journals." Madeline backed toward the stream, retrieved the saddlebags, and then helped Matthew onto her horse before mounting behind him. The scarred man watched with undisguised hatred. "Whitaker will find you," he called as they prepared to ride away. "No matter where you go, he'll find you." "Not if he's in prison first," Madeline replied, spurring the horse forward. They rode hard for several miles, following the stream as it wound through the ravine. Matthew's condition improved gradually, though Madeline could tell he was in pain from the way he held himself stiffly against her. When they finally emerged from the ravine onto the open plains, Denver was visible in the distance, its buildings shimmering in the afternoon heat. "We made it," Madeline said, relief evident in her voice. Matthew turned slightly to look at her, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper. "You came back for me." "Of course I did," she replied simply. "You would have done the same for me." "Yes," he agreed softly. "I would have." After a pause, he added, "That was brave, what you did back there. Reckless, but brave." Madeline smiled, though her heart was still racing from the encounter. "I had a good teacher." They rode into Denver as the sun was beginning to set, the city's streets busy with end-of-day traffic. Matthew directed them to a modest hotel near the federal building, reasoning that they would be safer in a public place than trying to find more isolated accommodation. "We'll get a room for the night and go to the marshal's office first thing in the morning," he said as they dismounted in front of the hotel. The clerk gave them a curious look as they entered Matthew with dried blood on his temple and Madeline in her travel-worn clothing, but asked no questions as he assigned them a room. They took turns washing up with the basin of water provided, Madeline carefully cleaning Matthew's wound. "It's not as bad as it looks," he assured her as she worked. "Head wounds just bleed a lot." "You could have been killed," Madeline said softly, her hands gentle as she applied a clean cloth to the cut. Matthew caught her wrist, halting her ministrations. "But I wasn't, thanks to you." Their eyes met, and the tension that had been building between them since that kiss in the line shack resurged with newfound intensity. Madeline was acutely aware of his hand on her wrist, of how close they were sitting on the edge of the bed, of the way his gaze dropped to her lips. But the moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Both tensed, Matthew reaching for his gun. "Who is it?" he called, positioning himself between Madeline and the door. "Room service, sir," came the reply. "A gentleman in the lobby asked us to deliver a message." Matthew and Madeline exchanged worried glances. Could Whitaker's men have found them already? Matthew approached the door cautiously, gun held low but ready. "Slide it under the door," he instructed. A folded piece of paper appeared beneath the door, and footsteps retreated down the hallway. Matthew retrieved the note and opened it, his expression changing from wariness to surprise. "It's from the federal marshal," he said, passing the note to Madeline. "He wants to meet with us tonight at his office." The note was brief but clear, signed by Marshal James Harrington. It requested their immediate presence regarding information about Thomas Whitaker. "How did he know we were here?" Madeline wondered, suspicion evident in her tone. "We just arrived." Matthew frowned, considering the question. "Whitaker has eyes everywhere, but so does the law. Someone could have recognized us and passed word to the marshal. Or it could be a trap," Madeline pointed out. "Possible," Matthew conceded. "But if the marshal is truly interested in Whitaker's activities, this might be our best chance to present your father's evidence." After discussing their options, they decided to go to the meeting but take precautions. They would bring the most incriminating journal but leave the others hidden in the room, and they would approach the federal building cautiously, watching for any sign of ambush. The streets of Denver were quieter now as they made their way to the federal building, a solid brick structure in the center of town. Lanterns burned in the windows, indicating that someone was indeed working late. Matthew kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, his hand never far from his gun. At the entrance, a deputy greeted them and led them upstairs to the marshal's office. Marshal Harrington was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard and shrewd eyes that missed nothing as they entered. "Mr. Calloway, Miss Norris," he greeted them, rising from behind his desk. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." "How did you know we were in Denver?" Matthew asked directly, remaining standing. The marshal's expression was unreadable. "I make it my business to know who comes and goes in my jurisdiction, especially when they have ties to ongoing investigations." He gestured to the chairs again. "Please sit, we have much to discuss." Cautiously, Matthew and Madeline took the offered seats, though neither fully relaxed. Madeline kept the journal close, not yet willing to reveal it. "I understand you have information regarding Thomas Whitaker," the marshal continued. "Information that could be of interest to the federal government." Matthew glanced at Madeline, letting her take the lead in this conversation. After all, it was her father's work, her fight. Madeline studied the marshal carefully before responding. Before I share anything, I need to know something. Where do you stand with regard to Whitaker Mining Company? A ghost of a smile crossed the marshal's face. Direct like your father, good. He leaned forward. Thomas Whitaker has been under federal investigation for the past 6 months. We suspect him of claim jumping, fraud, bribery of local officials, and possibly murder. But we've been unable to gather enough evidence to bring charges against him. He's too careful, too connected. And my father. Madeline asked, her voice tight with emotion. William Norris, did you know about his death? We were aware of it, the marshal confirmed. The official report listed it as a mining accident, but given the timing and circumstances, we had our suspicions. Unfortunately, suspicions aren't enough in a court of law. We need evidence. Madeline exchanged another look with Matthew, who nodded encouragingly. She placed the journal on the marshal's desk and opened it to a specific page. My father documented everything, she said. The legitimate claims Whitaker has stolen, the officials he's bribed, the threats made against those who wouldn't sell. It's all here, along with maps, dates, and names of witnesses. Marshal Harrington leaned forward, his interest evident as he began to examine the journal. His expression grew increasingly serious as he turned the pages. This is thorough work, he said finally, looking up at Madeline. Your father was a meticulous man. He believed in justice, Madeline replied, and he trusted that the law would do the right thing even when he was gone. The marshal closed the journal and pushed it back across the desk to her. Keep this safe. I'll need all of the journals for the official investigation, but for tonight, they're safer with you than they would be here. You believe me then? Madeline asked, surprised by his reaction. I believe the evidence, Marshal Harrington replied, and I believe Whitaker is exactly what you say. He is a murderer hiding behind a respectable business. He stood up, his decision made. I'll arrange for a federal escort to take you to a safe location tomorrow while we prepare to move against Whitaker. In the meantime, I suggest you return to your hotel and stay out of sight. As they prepared to leave, the marshal added, be careful. Whitaker has many allies in Denver, not all of whom wear their allegiance openly. We will, Matthew assured him, his hand at the small of Madeline's back as they left the office. The walk back to the hotel was tense, both of them scanning the streets for any sign of danger. But Denver remained quiet, and they reached their room without incident. Once inside, Madeline sank onto the edge of the bed, the emotional weight of the day finally catching up to her. He believed us, she said, wonder in her voice. After all this time, someone with authority finally believes what happened to my father wasn't an accident. Matthew sat beside her, taking her hand in his. Your father would be proud of you, Madeline. You've carried his work forward at great personal risk to ensure justice is done. Madeline turned to face him, tears shining in her eyes. I couldn't have done it without you, Matthew. You risked everything for me, a woman you barely knew. I knew enough, he said softly, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. I knew you were worth fighting for from the moment I found you in that bell tower. In the quiet of the hotel room, with the threat of Whitaker temporarily held at bay and the promise of justice on the horizon, Madeline allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing since that first day. She leaned into Matthew's touch, her heart racing as his gaze dropped to her lips. Matthew, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He answered by closing the distance between them, capturing her lips in a kiss that was at once tender and passionate. Madeline responded eagerly, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as she leaned into him, deepening the kiss. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their foreheads touching as they savored the moment of connection. I've wanted to do that again since that night in the line shack, Matthew admitted, his voice husky with emotion. So have I, Madeline confessed, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. They spent the evening talking, planning their future now that the immediate danger seemed to be passing. Matthew spoke of his ranch, of the life he had built there, and tentatively suggested that Madeline might consider staying in Colorado once the Whitaker business was resolved. It wouldn't be an easy life, he warned. Ranching has its hardships, its lean years, but it's a good life, an honest one." Madeline considered his words, imagining a future at his side. "I grew up on a farm," she reminded him. "I'm no stranger to hard work, and after everything that's happened, I think I'm ready to put down roots somewhere." The unspoken question hung between them: would those roots be with him? Neither was ready to put it into words just yet, but the possibility was there, tangible and hopeful. They slept that night with a sense of cautious optimism, Madeline on the bed and Matthew on a makeshift pallet on the floor. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter of federal escort, official proceedings against Whitaker, perhaps even a return to Matthew's ranch where Charlie waited. But for now, they had this moment of peace and each other. Morning brought a knock at their door. The deputy from the marshal's office, come to escort them to a safe house outside the city while the warrants for Whitaker's arrest were prepared. They gathered the journals and their few belongings, ready to take the next step in their journey. But as they descended the hotel stairs, a commotion at the entrance caught their attention. 3 men burst through the doors, guns drawn, their faces twisted with determination. At their head was the scarred man from the ravine. The deputy reacted quickly, pushing Madeline and Matthew back up the stairs while drawing his own weapon. "Federal Marshal, drop your weapons." The scarred man's response was a bullet that sent the deputy crumpling to the floor. Panic erupted in the hotel lobby as guests and staff scattered, seeking cover from the gunfire. Matthew grabbed Madeline's hand. "This way," he shouted, pulling her toward a side corridor that led to the hotel's kitchen. Behind them, the scarred man barked orders to his companions. "Get the woman in those books. Whitaker wants them alive if possible, but dead is better than nothing." They burst into the kitchen, startling the cook and a young serving girl who were preparing breakfast. "Out now," Matthew ordered, and the staff didn't need to be told twice, fleeing through the back door. Matthew and Madeline followed, emerging into an alley behind the hotel. The sounds of pursuit were close behind them, boots pounding on the wooden floors of the hotel. "We need to split up," Matthew said urgently, pressing the journals into Madeline's hands. "Take these to the marshal's office. It's 3 blocks north. I'll lead them away." "No," Madeline protested, her grip on his arm desperate. "They'll kill you." "And they'll kill us both if we stay together," Matthew countered. "The journals are what matter. Get them to safety." Before she could argue further, he pulled her close for a fierce, brief kiss. "Go now, I'll find you when it's safe." With a final, anguished look, Madeline tucked the journals securely under her arm and ran north, disappearing around the corner of the alley just as Whitaker's men burst out of the hotel's back door. "There," the scarred man shouted, pointing at Matthew. "Get him." Matthew fired a warning shot to draw their attention, then took off in the opposite direction from Madeline, leading the men away from her as she carried the precious evidence to safety. He ducked and weaved through the morning crowds, using the bustling streets of Denver to his advantage. But the scarred man was persistent, and his companions were quick. A bullet grazed Matthew's arm, sending a sharp pain through his body. He ducked into a hardware store, startling the shopkeeper who was just opening for the day. "Out the back," Matthew gasped, showing his bloodied arm. "Men with guns, get down!" The shopkeeper didn't hesitate, dropping behind his counter just as Whitaker's men entered the store, guns raised. "End of the line, Cowboy," the scarred man said, his weapon aimed at Matthew's chest. "Where's the woman?" "Gone," Matthew replied defiantly. "Beyond your reach." The scarred man's face twisted with rage. "We'll see about that. Whitaker has men all over this city. She won't get far." He gestured with his gun. "Now you're coming with us. Whitaker wants to have a word with the man who's been helping her." Matthew knew his options were limited. The wound in his arm was bleeding freely, and he was outnumbered 3-1. But if he could buy Madeline enough time to reach the marshal's office, it would be worth whatever happened to him. "All right," he said, raising his hands in surrender. "I'll go with you." The scarred man smiled unpleasantly. "Smart choice." They led Matthew out through the back of the store where a wagon was waiting. He was roughly bound and thrown into the back, covered with a tarp to hide him from view. As the wagon began to move, Matthew fought against the ropes, but they were tied expertly tight. His thoughts turned to Madeline. Had she reached the marshal's office? Was she safe? The pain in his arm and the uncertainty of his fate faded in comparison to his concern for her. Madeline ran as if her life depended on it, which it did. The journals clutched tightly to her chest. She navigated the increasingly crowded streets of Denver, heading toward the federal building. Every few seconds she glanced over her shoulder, terrified that Whitaker's men would appear. She was a block away from her destination when a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her into a narrow space between two buildings. Madeline opened her mouth to scream, but another hand clamped over it, silencing her. "Quiet," a familiar voice hissed in her ear. "Whitaker's men are watching the federal building." Madeline relaxed slightly, recognizing Charlie's voice. He released his hold on her, and she turned to face Matthew's trusted friend. "Charlie, how did you know time?" he interrupted, peering cautiously out at the street. "Matthew sent a telegram saying you were headed to Denver. When I didn't hear back, I got worried and followed. Good thing, too." He nodded toward the federal building, where two men in suits stood casually by the entrance. "Those men work for Whitaker. They've been there all morning." "We need to get inside," Madeline said urgently. "The marshal is expecting us. Matthew's in danger. Whitaker's men attacked us at the hotel." Charlie's expression darkened. "Where is he?" "I don't know," Madeline admitted, the fear she'd been holding at bay threatening to overwhelm her. "He led them away so I could escape with the journals." Charlie considered their options. "There's a side entrance to the federal building used mostly by the staff, might be less watched. We can try that." With Charlie leading the way, they circled around to approach the building from a different angle. As Charlie had predicted, the side entrance was unguarded. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a narrow corridor that led deeper into the building. A young clerk looked up in surprise as they entered, but Charlie quickly explained that they needed to see Marshal Harrington on urgent business. The clerk, noting their disheveled appearance and earnest manner, directed them to the marshal's office on the second floor. Marshal Harrington was just preparing to leave when they burst into his office. His expression shifted from annoyance to concern as he took in their appearance. "Miss Norris, what happened? Where is Deputy Collins?" "Shot," Madeline replied breathlessly, placing the journals on his desk. "At the hotel. Whitaker's men found us. Matthew led them away so I could bring these to you." The marshal's face hardened. "And where is Mr. Calloway now?" "We don't know," Charlie answered, "but if Whitaker's men have him, he's in grave danger." Marshal Harrington moved quickly, summoning his deputies and issuing orders. Within minutes, the federal building was a hub of activity as men prepared to fan out across Denver in search of Matthew and Whitaker's men. "Miss Norris, I need you to stay here," the marshal instructed. "You'll be safe, and I need you to go through these journals with my clerk, marking the most critical evidence." "But Matthew," Madeline began to protest. "We'll find him," the marshal assured her. "Mr. Charlie Watson," Charlie supplied. "I ride with Matthew." "Mr. Watson, would you be willing to accompany my men? Your knowledge of Mr. Calloway might prove useful in tracking him." Charlie nodded grimly. "Just give me a gun and point me in the right direction." As the marshal and Charlie prepared to leave, Madeline caught Charlie's arm. "Bring him back," she pleaded. "Please," Charlie's expression softened. "I will. That's a promise." Left alone with the clerk, a serious young man named Roberts, Madeline threw herself into the task of identifying the most damning evidence against Whitaker. Her fear for Matthew was a constant presence, a dull ache in her chest, but she channeled it into determination. The sooner they built their case against Whitaker, the sooner Matthew would be safe. Hours passed as they worked, Madeline explaining her father's notes and maps while Roberts carefully documented everything for the official record. The sun was beginning to set when Marshal Harrington returned, his expression grim. "We've located Whitaker," he announced. "He's holed up at his estate outside the city. My men have it surrounded." "And Matthew?" Madeline asked, rising to her feet. The marshal hesitated. "We believe he's inside. One of Whitaker's men was captured trying to flee. He confirmed that a prisoner was brought to the estate earlier today." "Is he alive?" Madeline's voice trembled despite her effort to remain calm. "The man didn't know," Marshal Harrington replied honestly, "but Whitaker would want information before anything else." The implication was clear, and Madeline felt her knees weaken. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. What happens now? We're preparing to move in at dawn, the marshal explained. Whitaker has armed guards, and a direct assault could get your friend killed if he's still alive. We're hoping Whitaker will surrender when he realizes he's surrounded. He won't, Madeline said with certainty. He'll fight or try to escape. The marshal nodded, having reached the same conclusion. That's why I'm sending men to cover all possible escape routes. He paused, studying Madeline's determined expression. Miss Norris, I know what you're thinking, but you cannot be part of this operation. It's too dangerous. Matthew risked everything for me, Madeline countered. I won't abandon him now. You won't be abandoning him, the marshal insisted. You'll be staying safe, which is what he wanted when he led those men away from you. Madeline wanted to argue further, but she recognized the logic in his words. Matthew had sacrificed his safety to protect her and the journals. Putting herself in danger now would make that sacrifice meaningless. Where is Charlie? She asked instead. With my men at the estate, the marshal replied. He insisted on staying. That at least gave Madeline some comfort. Charlie would do everything in his power to bring Matthew home safely. Get some rest, the marshal advised, his tone gentler now. There's a cot in the back room where you can sleep. I'll wake you as soon as we have news. Reluctantly, Madeline retreated to the small room, though she doubted she would sleep. Her mind was too full of worries about Matthew. Was he hurt? Was he even still alive? And beneath those immediate concerns, deeper questions about the future. If when Matthew was rescued, what then? Would they return to his ranch? Would she stay with him? Did he want her to? Despite her racing thoughts, exhaustion eventually claimed her, and Madeline fell into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of Matthew calling out to her from the bell tower where they had first met. She woke with a start to find Marshal Harrington standing over her, his face illuminated by the lantern he carried. Outside, the first light of dawn was just beginning to brighten the sky. It's time, he said simply. We're moving in. Madeline scrambled to her feet, following the marshal to his office where maps of Whitaker's estate were spread across the desk. Deputies were gathered around, receiving final instructions. Whitaker hasn't responded to our demands to surrender, the marshal explained to Madeline. We're going in from all sides. Your friend Charlie is with the team approaching from the north, where we believe the prisoner is being held based on the information from our captive. Madeline studied the map, her heart racing. What can I do? Stay here, the marshal replied firmly. I'll send word as soon as we know anything. It was the hardest thing Madeline had ever done, watching the marshal and his men leave while she remained behind. Roberts, the clerk, stayed with her, offering awkward words of comfort as the minutes stretched into hours. The waiting was unbearable. Madeline paced the office, unable to sit still, jumping at every sound from outside. When a deputy finally burst through the door shortly after noon, she nearly collapsed with anxiety. We've got Whitaker, the deputy announced, and most of his men. They surrendered when they realized they were outnumbered. And Matthew? Madeline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The deputy's expression softened. He's alive, miss, beaten pretty badly, but alive. They're bringing him to the doctor now. Relief washed over Madeline like a physical force, making her legs unsteady. Take me to him, please. The deputy looked to Roberts, who nodded his approval. I'll tell the marshal when he returns. Go on. The doctor's office was only 2 blocks from the federal building, but to Madeline, it felt like miles. She rushed inside to find Charlie seated in the waiting area, his clothing dusty and a bandage wrapped around his forearm. Charlie, she exclaimed, hurrying to his side. Are you all right? Where's Matthew? Charlie stood, his tired face breaking into a relieved smile. Doc's with him now, said he'll be fine, just needs rest and time to heal. He gestured to his arm. This is nothing, just a scratch from one of Whitaker's men who didn't want to surrender. Can I see him? Madeline asked, already moving toward the door Charlie had indicated. Doc said to wait, but Charlie shrugged. I reckon you've waited long enough. Madeline entered the examination room quietly, her heart constricting at the sight that greeted her. Matthew lay on a narrow bed, his face bruised, a bandage around his ribs and his injured arm properly dressed. His eyes were closed, but they opened at the sound of her approach. Madeline, he whispered, his voice rough but filled with relief. You're safe. She moved to his side, gently taking his uninjured hand in hers. Thanks to you, she replied, tears threatening to spill over. You should have seen Charlie. He came all the way from the ranch because he was worried about you, then joined the marshal's men to storm Whitaker's estate. A small smile crossed Matthew's battered face. Always could count on Charlie. His expression grew serious. The journal's safe, Madeline assured him, and Whitaker is in custody. It's over, Matthew, we did it. My father will have justice. Matthew squeezed her hand weakly. Your father would be proud of you, Madeline. You never gave up. Neither did you, she said softly, leaning down to place a gentle kiss on his forehead, careful to avoid his injuries. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger. But Matthew kept hold of her hand, preventing her from moving away. I need to say something first, he insisted, his eyes holding hers. When Whitaker's men had me, when I thought I might not make it, there was only one regret in my mind. What's that? Madeline asked, her heart racing. That I might never see you again, Matthew said simply. That I might never get the chance to tell you what you've come to mean to me. Madeline felt tears spring to her eyes. Matthew, I know it's fast, he continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. We've only known each other a short time, but sometimes when something is right, you just know it. And I know that finding you in that bell tower was no accident, Madeline. God brought me there to find you, and I don't intend to lose you now that I have. Madeline's tears flowed freely now, a mixture of joy and lingering fear from their ordeal. You won't lose me, she promised. I've been thinking about what you said about your ranch, about putting down roots. I want that, Matthew. I want to build a life with you. The smile that lit Matthew's face was worth all the danger they had faced. Is that a yes, then? You'll stay with me, be my wife. Yes, Madeline whispered, leaning down to kiss him properly this time, mindful of his injuries but unable to contain the love that had grown between them against all odds. Yes, I'll be your wife. The doctor, returning to check on his patient, found them thus engaged and cleared his throat loudly. I see my patient is feeling better, he observed dryly, but he still needs rest, young lady. Madeline straightened, blushing but unrepentant. Yes, doctor. I'll make sure he gets plenty of rest, once he's home. 2 weeks later, with Matthew sufficiently recovered to travel, they returned to the ranch outside Bonanza. Charlie rode ahead to prepare the cabin for their arrival, giving Matthew and Madeline some privacy on the journey. As they crested the final ridge, the ranch came into view, the modest cabin, the corral with horses grazing peacefully, the mountains rising majestically in the background. Home. It's not much, Matthew said, echoing his words from when he had first brought Madeline here, but it's ours. Madeline smiled, her hand finding his as they rode side by side. It's perfect. They were married a month later in St. Augustine's Church, with Charlie as best man and the entire town of Bonanza in attendance. The bell tower, where their story had begun, was decorated with wildflowers for the occasion, and as they exchanged vows, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, bathing them in a kaleidoscope of colors. Life on the ranch was everything Madeline had hoped for, challenging but rewarding, filled with hard work and moments of quiet joy. Matthew proved to be a devoted husband, his gentle strength a constant support as they built their life together. With her portion of the reward money offered for Whitaker's capture, they expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and improving the cabin. Charlie remained with them, more family now than employee. Someone has to keep you two young fools out of trouble, he would joke, though the affection in his voice was unmistakable. News eventually reached them that Thomas Whitaker had been convicted of multiple counts of fraud and the murder of William Norris. Justice had been served, allowing Madeline to finally lay her father's memory to rest and fully embrace her future with Matthew. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Matthew placed his hand over Madeline's still flat stomach. When do you want to tell Charlie? He asked, a smile of wonder crossing his face. About the baby, Madeline covered his hand with her own, returning his smile with one equally radiant. Soon, but for now I'm enjoying this moment just between us. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you ever think about how we met? How different our lives might have been if you hadn't heard that bell? Matthew turned to press a kiss to her temple. I try not to think about what might have been, he said softly. Just what is and what will be, and what is pretty wonderful. It is, Madeline agreed, her heart full as she gazed out at the land that had become her home. It truly is. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, Matthew and Madeline Calloway remained on their porch, hands entwined, hearts beating as one. From the bell tower of St. Augustine's to the wild, open spaces of their Colorado ranch, their journey had been one of danger and courage, of faith and determination. But most of all, it had been a journey of love, a love born in the unlikeliest of circumstances, tested by fire, and emerged stronger for it. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be, beside the man who had found her when she was lost, who had fought for her when all seemed hopeless, and who would love her for all the days of their lives. In the years that followed, the Calloway Ranch flourished, as did their family. Their first child, a son they named William after Madeline's father, arrived the following spring, with a daughter, Rebecca, joining the family 2 years later in honor of Matthew's sister. The cabin expanded into a proper home, and their herd grew to be one of the most respected in the county. Charlie remained an integral part of their lives, a beloved uncle to the children and Matthew's right hand in running the ranch. The bell tower of St. Augustine's became a special place for the family, with Matthew and Madeline taking their children there each year on the anniversary of their first meeting to tell them the story of how God had brought them together. And though life on the frontier was never easy, with its harsh winters, uncertain harvests, and occasional conflicts, Matthew and Madeline faced each challenge together, their love a beacon that guided them through even the darkest times. In finding each other, they had found not just love, but a home not just in a place, but in each other's hearts.